The Florence salon murder. The morning of Tuesday, November 6, 2001, began like any other for the patrons and employees of the Hair Gallery, a hair and nail salon located off Route 93 in Florence, Montana. At 11 a.m., a client arrived for her scheduled appointment. As she parked, she noticed something unusual. Someone was exiting through the salon's front door, which was rarely used. The salon typically used the rear entrance for daily operations. She watched as the individual, who appeared to be a man, walked away wearing an oversized black duster-style coat and a wide-brimmed hat, possibly a fedora or a top hat. After he disappeared from view, the customer proceeded to the back entrance, only to find a horrifying scene. 62-year-old Dorothy Harris, the salon's owner, lying lifeless in a pool of blood just inside the door. In shock, the woman rushed inside and called the police. When police arrived at the hair gallery, the grim scene only worsened. In a utility closet in the back room, they discovered the bodies of two more women, 44-year-old Brenda Patch, the salon's nail technician, and 71-year-old Cynthia Paulus, a regular customer. Both had suffered the same brutal fate as Dorothy Harris. Their throats had been cut. The crime immediately puzzled investigators. There was no apparent sexual motive, and nothing had been stolen from the premises. Even the salon's cash drawer remained untouched. Dorothy had made her usual Tuesday morning trip to the bank in Stevensville just 30 minutes before her body was found. Since the drive from Stevensville takes around 15 to 20 minutes, detectives believe the killer had a very short window to act. They theorized that Brenda had opened the salon and let Cynthia in for her appointment, and that the two were killed first, possibly forced to their knees in the utility closet, where signs of a struggle were evident. Despite the brutality of the attack, the lack of a clear motive, no robbery, no known personal grudges, left authorities with more questions than answers. Would you like a timeline of the events or more details about the investigation suspects? One officer likened the state of the closet to a battle scene. They also believed that the perpetrator had waited for Dorothy to return before taking her life. It has been stated that all three women sustained other injuries outside the cuts to their throats. But the authorities have declined to elaborate on what those injuries are outside of noting they were not of a sexual nature. Very little evidence was discovered at the scene, and investigators have declined to give details. Looking into the personal lives of all three women, the police failed to find any reason that may have led to their deaths. They were unable to even determine who, if anyone, was specifically targeted. While there has been some speculation that Dorothy was the main focus since the culprit appeared to have waited for her return, it has been argued that she may have simply stumbled onto the scene and was killed for that reason alone. It has also been theorized that the person responsible for the murders was someone who'd committed a crime of opportunity and picked the women at random. The crime had occurred in broad daylight in a tiny town of fewer than 1,000 residents where it was commonplace for doors to be left unlocked. Not only did this lead to panic among the residents, but it led to the idea that someone outside the community was responsible, that someone had passed through just to commit the crime, and then left. The man who was seen leaving the salon at 11 a.m. is considered a suspect. Investigators believe that the customer who found Dorothy's body had arrived on the scene just minutes after the murders occurred. Furthermore, other witnesses came forward to the authorities following the crime and stated that they had also seen the oddly dressed man. He is described as being in his 20s or early 30s with narrow facial features and is around 6 feet tall. According to local gossip, there is some speculation that the perpetrator is a woman. However, this is unsubstantiated and law enforcement does not support this theory. Witnesses who saw the man said he was walking with a purpose. Using this lead, the police had sent dogs trace the man's movements. They followed his scent through a nearby alleyway, through a dirt car park off a local restaurant, the Wild River, through several back streets, and then to a school parking lot. The canine lost the scent in a nearby pasture 4 blocks from the crime scene. However, a second scent dog led the police from the pasture to a nearby home. The resident, however, was physically unable to have carried out the crime and was promptly ruled out of the investigation. One other similar crime then occurred almost a year later on September 4, 2002, although it took place in Great Bend, Kansas, about 1,300 miles from Florence. On the afternoon of the 4th, A customer pulled into the parking lot of the Dolly Madison Cake Discount Bakery at 1004 Harrison Street. The customer immediately noticed a man they didn't recognize locking up outside the front door. He told the customer as they approached that the bakery was closed for the day. The customer thought this was odd since it was early in the day but thought nothing of it and returned home. Later that evening, however, a delivery driver entered the bakery using the back entrance and was horrified to see 2 dead bodies on the floor. The victims were 24-year-old Mandy Alexander, who'd been an employee for just 3 days, and 79-year-old Mary Drake, a customer. Both women had been stabbed to death. Like the crime in Florence, investigators struggled to find a motive for the deaths of Mandy and Mary. While a small amount of cash had been taken from the register, the bags and purses of the 2 women were left untouched. Neither victim had been sexually assaulted, and law enforcement found nothing in their backgrounds to indicate why they had been targeted. Like the case in Florence, it seemed totally random. The customer who'd seen the man locking up earlier that day helped investigators create a composite sketch which was distributed throughout the town. It noted that the suspect stood around 6'1", weighed around 175 pounds, was between the ages of 30 and 35, and had light brown or blonde to color-length hair. A worker at a nearby motel recognized the description and told the police about a transient man who checked in on the 4th and checked out the following day. The man had shaved his head before leaving. Still, both the transient man and the suspect from the bakery have never been identified. In the years since, law enforcement have stated their belief that the 2 cases are linked but once more declined to give further details. In February 2005, authorities revealed that they had identified a suspect in the Florence case. Brian Weber, at the time of the crime, had been living in Nampa, Idaho, about 375 miles away. A small-time drug dealer who sold meth, Weber was also an addict himself, which had led to him becoming increasingly violent. He eventually began to engage in petty criminal behavior to help fund his habits. Weber was questioned shortly after the Florence's slangs had occurred and his DNA was taken. Weber was questioned about whether his DNA might be found at the scene, but he stated he hadn't been inside the building since it was used as a post office before it became the salon. He later admitted to being under the influence during the interview and was unclear about the questions and his responses. In February 2003, he was arrested following an assault related to a methamphetamine deal. By February 2004, he faced multiple drug-related charges and received a 24-year prison sentence. Over time, he continued to deny involvement in the case. Authorities claimed he made suggestive remarks to 2 different inmates. A wired informant tried to obtain a confession but was unsuccessful after being detected. His attorneys eventually secured a reduction of his sentence to 10 years. Another individual under scrutiny was Lincoln Benavides, a longtime drug user from Idaho. As a teenager, Benavides lived on the streets with his sister, and he began to run into trouble with law enforcement from the age of 13. Like Weber, Benavides began dealing drugs and soon became a career criminal. In February 2008, authorities alleged that both men knew each other and they were responsible for multiple assaults and drug offenses together. The 2 were then charged with the triple murders. The indictment alleged that the slayings were carried out as part of a collection of a drug debt and that Benavides was the leader of a drug distribution ring which operated throughout Idaho and Montana between 1999 and February 2001. It also claimed that Weber worked as a violent enforcer for the organization. The indictment read in parts, quote, "On occasion, Weber would threaten other dealers or beat them in order to facilitate the collection of money for the organization. On occasion, Brian Weber and Lincoln Benavides would together threaten or beat someone. Little evidence was revealed at the time. Authorities stated that much of the detail in the case would be revealed during the trial. Benavides was not believed to have physically committed the murders, but was accused of directing, encouraging, or facilitating the killings. The indictment also highlighted that both he and Weber left the States soon after the crimes, with Benavides even leaving the country before returning to Texas a few months later. Prior to trial, Benavides accepted a plea agreement. The murder charges were dropped and he received a 25-year sentence for drug-related offenses. Weber's exoneration came later, in 2010, when evidence confirmed he was not in Montana at the time of the murders. This, combined with the death of the prosecution's only credible witness, most others being inmates or individuals with criminal backgrounds, in February 2008, caused the case to collapse. In February 2018, Weber was sentenced to 15 years in prison for drug offenses, with an additional 10 years of supervised release. The case against Weber and Benavides has drawn significant criticism, as many believe the prosecution built a weak case and that local authorities may have attempted to coerce confessions from the two men under pressure to secure a conviction. Since their names were cleared, no new arrests or meaningful developments have occurred in the investigation. The Florence salon murders are still unsolved. If you have any information about the case, you can contact the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office at 406-375-4024. Moving on to the next case. Mary Boyle. Mary Boyle is a name well known to many in Ireland, associated with one of the country's most heartbreaking and contentious missing persons cases. Often referred to as Ireland's Madeleine McCann, Mary's disappearance remains the longest-running investigation involving a missing child in the Republic of Ireland. Born on June 14, 1970, Mary was a bright, outgoing 6-year-old with a lively personality. She had a close-knit family, including her older brother, Paddy, and her twin sister, and to whom she was especially close. Mary was known to be the more daring of the twins. Though she was born in Birmingham, her family relocated to Ballyshannon, Ireland, in the early 1970s. The last confirmed sighting of Mary occurred around 3:30 p.m. on March 18, 1977. Mary had been playing outdoors with her siblings and cousins near her grandparents' remote farm, where the family had been staying since St. Patrick's Day on March 17. During the afternoon, she noticed her uncle heading off to return a ladder to a nearby neighbor and decided to follow him. However, when they reached a large bog, she gave up and turned back toward the house on her own. The return trip should have taken just a few minutes, but Mary never made it home. Her uncle remained at the neighbor's property for about half an hour, engaged in conversation. As time passed and Mary failed to return, her family grew concerned and began searching the surrounding area, asking anyone nearby if they had seen the child. One report from the Irish Independent mentioned a fisherman who claimed to have seen Mary being abducted in a red Volkswagen Beetle. However, he later clarified in a BBC podcast that he hadn't witnessed an abduction, but had seen a suspicious red car in the vicinity around the time of her disappearance. When the Garda arrived on the scene, they sprung into action, draining bogs in the area in an attempt to uncover her body. The lake behind Mary's grandparents' house was also drained and authorities filmed a reconstruction of her last known movements using her twin sister Anne. A famous Irish country music star named Margot O'Donnell, who was a friend and distant relative of the family, caught wind of the case and funded searches for Mary on the surrounding hillside by selling new music. Searches have been regularly carried out since 1977, but so far, Mary has never been located. Mary's case is extremely controversial. There are unclear details, conflicting reports, and allegations of corruption surrounding it. It is widely believed that a politician stops law enforcement from detaining and questioning a prime suspect in the case. Thus, it has never been solved. One of the loudest voices supporting this belief is a right-wing journalist named Gemma O'Doherty. O'Doherty is a determined journalist who has not only written about the case in publications, case called Mary Boyle, The Untold Truth. The documentary is available to watch on YouTube, although O'Doherty herself was banned from the platform in 2019 for repeatedly violating YouTube's hate speech policies. O'Doherty is largely considered to be a controversial character herself. She's known to be a racist anti-vaxxer with anti-LGBTQ+ beliefs. Reportedly, her news-gathering ethics have also been called into question in the past. That said, her theory pertaining to Mary's case can't be entirely discredited, as there are several pieces of evidence supporting corruption and a cover-up. In her documentary, Gemma suggests the theory that Mary was sexually abused and murdered. her sister, and in several other relatives have publicly claimed that they know what happened to the 6-year-old and they know who the culprit is, and supports O'Daugherty's theory and says the perpetrator is still alive and still living in the country. In the documentary, and can be heard saying, "I believe Mary had a secret. I believe Mary had to be killed to stop her telling." This allegation has come at a personal cost, and is now estranged from her mother, and deep divisions have formed within the Boyle family due to differing opinions about what happened. In February 2016, the twins' mother also named and dismissed the renewed public appeals as the most ridiculous carry-on I have ever seen in my life. Margot O'Donnell later recounted confronting the politician believed to have blocked the questioning of the main suspect. He denied any interference and accused Margot of being a barefaced liar. The original suspect was let go without any charges and was never publicly named in the media. Journalist Gemma O'Daugherty has claimed that the politician involved was not only close friends with the suspect, but also maintained a strong rapport with the superintendent overseeing the investigation. Former Detective Sergeant Aidan Murray corroborated this, stating that he had nearly secured a confession from the suspect before being ordered by a superior to back off. Murray also said he witnessed a phone call between the politician and police instructing officers not to pursue further questioning. The politician in question is believed to have been Sean McKenniff, who died in February 2017. When still alive, McKenniff was supposedly surrounded by accusations of sexual abuse and grooming. Mary's uncle, Jerry Gallagher, reportedly worked for him. Many believe that Jerry Gallagher is responsible for the disappearance of his niece, and Boyle has never outright accused her uncle, but armchair detectives have put two and two together. According to O'Daugherty's documentary, Gallagher gave conflicting statements over the years and apparently didn't even admit that Mary had been with him when she initially went missing. The documentary is not without its criticisms, even from those who starred in it, but it does give viewers some compelling information. Even if no politicians were involved, it appears that law enforcement's efforts to find the murderer of a 6-year-old girl were severely lacking. Other suspects in Mary's case are few and far between. In 2014, a man named Brian McCann, who had been jailed for 2 years for several sex offenses just a few years before, was pulled in for questioning, but later released without charge. He has publicly denied any involvement with the 6-year-old's disappearance. Another man who was considered a suspect for a time was the infamous Scottish serial killer and pedophile, Robert Black. He was thought to have been involved when authorities discovered that he was a cross-border truck driver who, as part of his job, often visited that same county from which Mary vanished. He was even known to have been in the area at the time of her disappearance. One witness even claimed they heard crying coming from the back of his van, which was parked outside of a pub in the village of Anagri. However, he has since been dismissed as a suspect. According to the Gardaí, Mary's case remains active, though her family has expressed little confidence in the investigation and doubts they will ever find justice. In February 2018, a silent demonstration took place outside the coroner's office in Strandorler. Protesters called for an official inquest into Mary's disappearance, which would allow key witnesses to give sworn public testimony for the first time. A petition with 10,000 signatures was submitted in support of the inquest. However, this effort did not lead to any formal proceedings, and there are reports suggesting that Mary's mother has consistently opposed the idea of holding an inquest. Multiple theories persist regarding what happened to Mary. A common belief is that Jerry Gallagher may have been involved and that Gemma O'Daugherty's allegations of a cover-up are credible. Others have speculated about the behavior of Mary's mother, suggesting that the family might have been complicit in concealing what occurred. There is also a theory that Mary may have died in an accident that was never reported, or that she never actually left the house, implying the possibility of her death occurring inside the cottage. Mary's father tragically died in a fishing accident in February 2005. The rest of the family remains split by their opinions on what really happened to the little girl. To this day, her case is still unsolved. Moving on to the next case. The Ansai shootings. At 3:45 p.m. on September 5, 2012, multiple gunshots were fired on a roadside turnout near Cheveling, close to the southern edge of Lake Annecy in France. Brett Martin, a British former RAF pilot, came upon the aftermath while cycling nearby. Due to the noise of the nearby river, he hadn't heard the shots and only discovered the grisly scene as he followed his usual route. The first sign of the tragedy was 7-year-old Zainab Al-Hili, who, against all odds, was still alive. Investigations later revealed that Zainab had been shot in the shoulder and struck on the head with the weapon. She managed to make her way out to the road before collapsing in front of her family's BMW. The car was still running, the doors locked, and its windows riddled with bullet holes. Inside were the bodies of 3 adults, 50-year-old Saad Al-Hili, his 47-year-old wife Iqbal, and her 74-year-old mother Suhaila Al-Alef. Saad and Iqbal were British citizens of Iraqi origin, while Suhaila held Swedish citizenship. The BMW had been sharply reversed into the lay by leaving visible marks on the road, and it was still in reverse gear when Brett arrived on the scene. Its rear wheels spun in loose sand. Each victim had been shot twice in the head. There was one more body lying in the roads, Sylvain Molière, a 45-year-old Frenchman who'd been out cycling when he was caught in the crosshairs. He had been shot 7 times. The El-Hili family's youngest daughter, just 4 years old, was later found by forensic investigators hidden beneath her deceased mother's legs in the rear footwell of the car. She had remained there for 8 hours but was found physically unharmed. Ballistics analysis of cartridge casings and fragments from the pistols but plate revealed that the murders had been committed using a Luger P06 semi-automatic pistol. This firearm, which fires 7.65 by 21 mm parabellum rounds from an 8-round magazine, is typically viewed as a collector's item, though it had once been exported to the US and adopted by the Swiss Army. While not particularly powerful, the weapon is known for its accuracy and reliability. The case, which resulted in 4 deaths and left a child injured, was investigated by both the French National Gendarmerie's criminal and forensic divisions. In September 2012, a joint task force was also formed between British and French authorities to help move the case forward. However, the scene yielded very little useful evidence. The location, a picnic area, provided limited clues, and those that were uncovered pointed in different directions. Some aspects of the case, such as the calculated execution-style killings and the brutal targeting of a child, suggested the involvement of a professional assassin. On the other hand, the perpetrator had left behind 21 shell casings and had used a very distinct and uncommon weapon. Much like the Florence case we discussed earlier, investigators working on the Ansai shooting struggled to find an obvious motive. For some time, it was theorized that 50-year-old Saad was the main target of the attack, that his family were collective damage, and that Sylvain was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Saad and Iqbal had been living in the UK for over 20 years, with Saad working as an engineer and Iqbal a dentist. The couple's neighbors and friends had nothing but good things to say about the family. Saad, by all accounts, was a doting father, while Iqbal was a devoted wife and mother. There were rumors during the initial investigation that the father of 2 worked around some sensitive topics due to his career. A French newspaper named Le Mans alleged that Saad had access to a Swiss bank accounts that belonged to Saddam Hussein's political party. The paper claimed that they had obtained this information from the German Secret Service. However, there is no evidence to connect Saad to Saddam Hussein. The Swiss bank account that has been linked to the 50-year-old is actually his father's. Saad's father, Kadim, was a lawyer and businessman who moved the family to the UK in 1971 after his brother was arrested by Iraq's intelligence agency and vanished for a year. When he returned, he had slurred speech and brain damage, which prompted Kadim to move his family to safety. While the family moved, Kadim returned to Iraq in 1974 to continue running his businesses. He retired in 1982, moving permanently to the UK. When he passed away, he left behind $1 million in a Swiss bank account for his 2 sons, Saad and Zaid, as well as properties in England and Spain. Following his passing, the 2 brothers began to argue about who should get what. This disagreement was still ongoing when Saad was killed. Upon learning all this information, authorities turned their attention to Zaid, believing he had a motive to want his brother dead. Zaid, for his parts, didn't believe Saad was a victim of a professional hit. Zaid pointed out that if someone had truly wanted to kill his brother, it would have been far simpler to do so in the UK, where Saad had a predictable routine and lived at a permanent residence. He also emphasized that Saad's job never granted him access to sensitive information. Nonetheless, on September 28, just a few weeks after the murders, authorities executed a search warrant at Saad's home. While examining the crime scene, investigators had discovered that Saad possessed a taser, a weapon illegal in the UK. This led them to believe he may have feared for his or his family's safety. In conversations with other relatives, police learned that Saad had allegedly expressed fear of his brother. However, the search of Zaid's property yielded no evidence linking him to the killings. Even without physical evidence, investigators continued to treat Zaid as a primary suspect, subjecting him to repeated interrogations over the next 7 to 8 months. Some of these sessions reportedly lasted up to 8 hours. In June 2013, French authorities requested Zaid's presence as a witness, but he declined to appear. Later that same month, he was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder, with investigators theorizing that his motive was to inherit the entirety of their father's estate. However, the case quickly fell apart as there was still no evidence connecting Zaid to the crime. Zaid continued to maintain his innocence and suggested that Sylvain was the true target of the attack. Sylvain was a divorced father of 3 who worked as a welder at a factory which crafted components for nuclear reactors. The 45-year-old's career choice led to wild speculation that he and Saad knew one another and that the two were in cahoots. However, there is no evidence to support these suggestions. Authorities have found no evidence to indicate Sylvain was the main targets, and this lack of motive and evidence has led to the idea that the 4 adults were killed by a lone psychopath, someone who killed for the sake of killing with no motive and no specific target in mind. This is supported by the fact that neither Sylvain nor the Al-Healy family intended on being on that road at the time of the shootings. Sylvain had been out on a bike ride using a route that had been suggested by his girlfriend's father, but he had gotten lost and somehow turned around on the way. Similarly, the Al-Healy family had only decided that morning to go for a walk, and they had been given directions by a going with the lone psychopath theory. Law enforcement cross-referenced military records with psychiatric visits, but found nothing of use. In April of 2014, while going through a list of everyone Sylvain's girlfriend knew, they came across a man named Patrice Menegaldo. Detectives called him in for an interview, which lasted an hour. They hoped he might have been privy to some information about Sylvain that they had not seen. Patrice was a 50-year-old former paratrooper in the French Foreign Legion, but appeared to have no useful information about the cyclist. 2 months after his interview, he took his own life. The note he left behind read in parts that he couldn't handle being a suspect in a murder. This struck investigators as odd, as they had never named him as a suspect or even a person of interest. They had not treated him as such either, and overall had no reason to think he was involved. His sudden suicide, however, led to some speculation that he was the lone psychopath. After all, he had a military background and was mentally unwell. Still, many find it odd that he waited 2 months before taking his own life if he was truly the perpetrator and was scared of getting caught. It's unknown what other information his last letter contains, as it has never been made public understandably. There is no evidence tying Patrice to the murders. 1 month later, in July of 2014, it came to light that Saad's wife, Iqbal, had briefly married an American police officer in 1999. The pair had quickly split up, and only a few people knew of their marriage. 7 hours after the demise of Sylvain and the Al-Healy family, the former police officer, James Thompson, told a friend that he wasn't feeling well. He died of a massive coronary while driving home. While there was nothing suspicious about James's death, he was unhealthy and unwell. The bizarre timing of the death caused even investigators in France to give pause. The final theory in the Alps shootings is that a child rapist and killer named Nordal Lowlandus was involved. In 2022, a man previously convicted of multiple serious offenses was examined for possible connections to the case, but no direct link was established. Given the nature of his past crimes, it seemed inconsistent that he would have spared 2 young survivors. A reconstruction of the victim's final movements was conducted in 2021. In early 2025, a previously interviewed individual was questioned again. Though he was briefly held, authorities quickly confirmed he was no longer considered a suspect. The investigation remains open. Melvin Charles Horst. 4-year-old Melvin Charles Horst lived near the intersection of Vine and Paradise Street in Oroville, Ohio. On the afternoon of December 27, 1928, he went out to play with 4 neighborhood friends, carrying a small red truck or wagon he had received as a Christmas gift. The boys gathered in an empty lot near the railroad tracks on Chestnut Street. At around 4:30 p.m., Melvin's mother, Zora, called for him to come inside for supper, but he never responded. Concerned, she sent his older brother to check with the neighbors, but there was no sign of him. By 6 p.m., Melvin's father, Raymond, arrived home from work to find Zora frantic with worry. The couple immediately began searching for their son. By then, darkness had settled in, as the sun had set at 5:06 p.m. that winter evening. When there was still no sign of Melvin by 7 p.m., the police were called. Officers quickly located and questioned the children who had been playing with him earlier that day. His friends recalled that as evening approached, Melvin had mentioned that it was getting late, and he should head home. The walk from the empty lot to the horse home was only a block, yet Melvin was never seen again. The only trace of his journey was the red toy truck or wagon he had been playing with, found abandoned in the front yard of his house. By 8:30 p.m., around 4,500 Oroville residents had gathered to search for the missing 4-year-old, who had now been gone for approximately 4 hours. His uncle Roy Horst, who served as the village marshal, led the extensive search effort. The search continued for weeks, covering more than 100 square miles. Authorities went door to door, but no sign of Melvin was ever found. Investigators initially considered the possibility that he had been mistaken for another young boy in the neighborhood who closely resembled him and belonged to a wealthy family. If this were the case, they expected ransom demands to follow, but none ever came. Another theory focused on the tense political climate of 1928. Prohibition was in full effect, and Roy, known for his strict enforcement of liquor laws, had made many enemies. Some speculated that Melvin's disappearance might have been an act of revenge against his uncle. Roy had been living with Melvin and his family in the months leading up to the boy's disappearance and was considerably close to his nephew, Melvin. Authorities wondered if his disappearance was a kidnapping by bootleggers, manufacturers and distributors of alcohol, made out of revenge for Roy's part in enforcing the current controversial laws of the time. The media covered the case Elias Arnold and his children William Arnold, Arthur Arnold, and his children William Arnold, Arthur Arnold, Elias Arnold, and his children William Arnold, Arthur Arnold, and Dorothy McHenry, as well as his son-in-law Dorothy's husband Bascom McHenry, on charges of kidnapping. The arrest was made on the information of the 8-year-old nephew of Elias named Charles Jr. Hanna, who claimed he saw Melvin being lured from outside into the home of the Arnolds. A second boy, who was a 9-year-old neighbor of the horse and the Arnolds, corroborated this story, and the arrests were made. Detectives theorized that because of the bootlegging connection and because the Arnolds lived so close to the Horst family, that Melvin had been kidnapped out of revenge for the many arrests and multiple cases of imprisonment of Elias and his family members on alcohol-related charges. The Arnolds insisted they were innocent and provided alibis for the time that Melvin went missing, but the testimony of Junior and the other neighbor boy was enough to get Elias and one of his sons, Arthur, of kidnapping. The 2 men spent 3 months in jail before new evidence proved that Junior, the boy who insisted he witnessed the abduction, could not have seen what he claimed to have seen that day due to his position relative to where he claims to have witnessed the luring of Melvin into the home. A second trial was convened and the men were found not guilty and released. Junior then said that he had lied to cover up the actions of his own father, Charles Hanna, and another neighbor, Earl Conold, and that they had killed the boy and ordered him to tell the false story of the Arnolds, luring him to deter suspicion. When questioned under duress, both of the men falsely confessed to being part of the murder inside a garage that police accused them of drinking whiskey in. The police pressured them to falsely admit that they killed the boy after fearing he would rat them out for drinking, but this confession turned out to be false and the true whereabouts of the boy remained a mystery. Investigators also explored the possibility that Melvin had been struck by a car and that the driver, fearing the consequences, had hidden his body. Numerous theories of kidnapping and murder circulated, but none yielded concrete evidence. One particular lead suggested a connection to organized crime, specifically to Anthony Tony Long LaFOC from the Akron, Ohio area. A woman came forward claiming that Melvin had been kidnapped as an act of revenge against Roy and that she had been assigned to watch the boy for a few days in her apartment near Market Street in Akron. She further alleged that Laffick later moved the child elsewhere. Authorities attempted to verify her claims but found no evidence to support them. Lafoche passed away in 1994, taking any potential secrets with him. After Melvin's parents relocated to Florida, the investigation continued but ultimately became a cold case. His younger sister, the only surviving sibling, still hopes for answers in her lifetime. Moving on to the next case. Jolie Calan. 18-year-old Jolie Calan had a promising future ahead of her. A dedicated and hard-working student, she was preparing to leave home for university in the coming months. Known for her petite frame, popularity, and kind nature, Jolie's family loved her most for her compassionate heart. In August 2015, she agreed to go on a hike with her ex-boyfriend, 20-year-old Lauren Daniel Bonner, hoping they could remain on good terms as friends. Although Jolie had recently started dating someone new, her empathetic nature led her to believe the hike might help bring closure. The night before, she texted a friend in a joking manner, saying, "If something happens to me, you'll know who I was with." Tragically, she had no idea how prophetic those words would be. Bonner was far from a favorite among Julie's friends and family. He was known to be possessive and jealous, often insisting that Jolie spend all her time with him, or within his circle of France. He didn't like that she had her own social life outside of him, and he had frequently threatened to take his own life whenever Jolie attempted to break things off. It was only with her university career looming and the fact that she'd be moving away that finally gave her the courage to split up with Bonner for good. She largely ignored subsequent pleas for her to take him back. On August 30th, Jolie, her ex-boyfriend, and his dog Kyber made their way through the Chia State Park in Alabama. During the course of the hike, Bonner took several photos of Jolie and posted them to his Instagram. The final image showed the 18-year-old with her back to the camera as she stood on a cliffside and looked out across the mist-shrouded mountains. The post was captioned, "Oh, just enjoying the view." After he took this image, Bonner pulled out a gun and shot Jolie in the back of the head. Once she collapsed to the ground, Bonner turned her over and shot her again between the eyes before he pushed her off the 40-foot cliff they were standing on. After committing the horrific crime, the 20-year-old returned to his car where he called 911 and turned himself in saying, "I want to turn myself in for the murder of my ex-girlfriend Jolene Calan that happened just a little while ago on Sheer Mountain." From here, Bono waited for the police to arrive. When they did, they quickly found Jolene's body. Her ex-boyfriend was covered in blood and the substance was found on his car and in his steering wheel, as well as on top of the cliff where Jolie was shot. Despite admitting to the crime when he called 911, plead not guilty when he was charged with murder. His trial began in November of 2015, during which he attempted to claim that he and Jolie had entered into a murder-suicide pact, which he found he could not go through with after he killed the 18-year-old. He claimed that she told him she didn't want to see it coming, which is why he shot her from behind. Jolie's friends and family disputed this idea. She was excited about the future, had been preparing for university, and had started a new relationship. To them, it was more likely that Bonner had slain Jolie in cold blood because she refused to rekindle the couple's relationship. Meanwhile, Bonner's defense claimed that the 20-year-old had Asperger's syndrome and that he should be granted youthful offender status as a result. In Alabama law, any defendant aged 21 or under can file for this status, which guarantees that the defendant will serve no more than 3 years in prison, regardless of the severity of the crime committed. Naturally, Jolie's loved ones were appalled by this notion. They were further distraught when Bonner was granted this status. The 18-year-old's father, Michael, subsequently called a local ABC affiliate to protest this status. A media frenzy ensued, and the decision to give Bonner this status received massive backlash. The case was already so high-profile that Bonner had to be escorted to and from court in a bulletproof vest. And this new decision had the public even more riled up. In December of 2015, it was walked back and the status was rescinded. The court later heard that Bonner had bragged to his cellmates about killing Jolie, saying if he couldn't have her, no one could. On July 13th of 2017, Bonner pleaded guilty to murder. The defense requested leniency, arguing that the now 22-year-old was struggling with mental health issues. Despite this, he was sentenced as an adult to 52 in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Additionally, he was ordered to pay over $11,000 in restitution to the Alabama Crime Victims' Compensation Commission. While Jolie's family will have to endure life without her, they found some comfort in the verdict. Relieved that Bonner was not granted youthful offender status. Her father, Michael, expressed his satisfaction stating, "It's the right thing to do. I mean, come on. You don't give youthful offender and maybe 3 years for cold-bloodedly killing somebody." Jolie was a sweet, good girl, and I think she's smiling today. Moving on to the next case. Gypsy Blanchard. Dee Blanchard and her daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, were far from an ordinary family, but for a time, they managed to make things work. That changed in June 2015 when Dee and Gypsy's neighbors grew concerned after noticing strange posts on their shared Facebook page. Missouri's sheriffs were alerted and conducted a welfare check at the Blanchard home. Inside, officers discovered Dee's body lying face down on her bed in a pool of blood, the result of fatal stab wounds inflicted days earlier. Gypsy was nowhere to be found, which was alarming since Dee had claimed her daughter suffered from leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and other chronic illnesses. She was also said to have the mental capacity of a 7-year-old due to brain damage from her premature birth. According to neighbors, Gypsy was confined to a wheelchair and entirely dependent on her mother's care. In the home, Gypsy's wheelchair was found as well as her medications. This led police to think she might have been abducted and in serious danger. However, police found Gypsy Rose the next day in Wisconsin, where she had traveled with her boyfriend she had met online. She was alive and well, but things were about to get worse for her. Investigators soon announced, to the shock of family and friends and the public, that Gypsy was, in fact, an adult and had none of the physical or mental health issues her mother represented her as having. Further investigation found that some of the doctors who examined Gypsy had found no evidence of the claimed disorders, and in one case suspected Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which a caregiver often exaggerates and induces mental or physical health problems in those who are in their care with the primary motive of gaining attention or sympathy. Dee had changed her name after her family confronted her about how she treated Gypsy and suspected her of poisoning stepmother. Nonetheless, many people accepted her situation as true, and the two benefited from the efforts of charities such as Habitat for Humanity, Ronald McDonald House, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Dee had been making her daughter pass herself off as younger and pretend to be disabled and chronically ill, in the process subjecting her to unnecessary surgery and medication, including a feeding tube put into her stomach and controlling her through occasional physical and psychological abuse. They often appeared on TV together, including spots on the local news, with Dee always holding on to Gypsy's hand tight, squeezing to alert Gypsy that she said something that she didn't like. Over time, Gypsy began creating a secret online life while her mother slept. Through a dating site she had joined, she connected with Nicholas Gojan, and over the course of 2 years they plotted a way to eliminate Dee. According to text messages and interrogations, Nicholas entered the Blanchard home and allegedly stabbed Dee while Gypsy hid in the bathroom. Afterward, the pair took several $1,000s from a safe in the house, and Nicholas mailed the murder weapon, a knife provided by Gypsy, to his home in Big Bend to avoid being caught with it. The disturbing Facebook post led authorities to Gojan's residence in Big Bend, Wisconsin, where the two were arrested on June 2015. Gypsy later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 10-year prison sentence, while Nicholas faced trial for first-degree murder. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. Nonetheless, many people accepted her situation as true, and the two benefited from the efforts of charities such as Habitat for Humanity, Ronald McDonald House, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Dee had been making her daughter pass herself off as younger and pretend to be disabled and chronically ill, in the process subjecting her to unnecessary surgery and medication, including a feeding tube put into her stomach and controlling her through occasional physical and psychological abuse. They often appeared on TV together, including spots on the local news, with Dee always holding on to Gypsy's hand tight, squeezing to alert Gypsy that she said something that she didn't like. Over time, Gypsy began creating a secret online life while her mother slept. Through a dating site she had joined, she connected with Nicholas Gojan, and over the course of 2 years they plotted a way to eliminate Dee. According to text messages and interrogations, Nicholas entered the Blanchard home and allegedly stabbed Dee while Gypsy hid in the bathroom. Afterward, the pair took several $1,000s from a safe in the house, and Nicholas mailed the murder weapon, a knife provided by Gypsy, to his home in Big Bend to avoid being caught with it. The disturbing Facebook post led authorities to Gojan's residence in Big Bend, Wisconsin, where the two were arrested on June 2015. Gypsy later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 10-year prison sentence, while Nicholas faced trial for first-degree murder. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Daugherty. On the morning of February 11, 2010, a truck driver was making his way through the quiet streets of Greensburg, Pennsylvania. The calm, empty road seemed ideal for a quick delivery, but something unusual caught his eye. Stopping near Greensburg-Salem Middle School, he noticed a tipped-over trash can. Though it might have been easier to ignore and continue on, his curiosity led him to investigate. What he found was horrifying. Inside the dumpster lay the badly mutilated and bloodied body of a woman. Unable to comprehend what he was seeing, he quickly called 911, and the police rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, officers found the woman's body haphazardly thrown into the dumpster, with numerous stab wounds visible on her body. Further examination revealed bruises, indicating she had been severely beaten before her death. The location of the body, discarded in a dumpster outside a middle school, suggested that this wasn't where the murder had occurred, but rather where the body had been left after being disposed of. As the police searched the woman's battered body, they discovered a note tucked into the back pocket of her pants. The condition of the body stood in stark contrast to the contents of the note, with the only truth in the note being the name of the victim, Jennifer. The circumstances surrounding her death were a chilling mystery, leaving the police to wonder what horrors she endured in her final moments. A deeper investigation led officers to Jennifer Daugherty's parents, Richard and Denise Daugherty, who were called in to identify the body. Upon seeing their daughter's mutilated remains, they were devastated, unable to fathom that their sweet, gentle girl had been taken from them in such a brutal way. But things did come to a stop afterwards, since the Greensburg Six got bored of constantly beating Jennifer to a pulp. The group then decided to vote to either let Jennifer go on the expectation that she would remain quiet or to kill her and get rid of her body. Jennifer begged her supposed friends to set her free. But the next morning, February 11th, she learned that all 6 had unanimously voted to end her life. Before killing her, the group somehow thought that making Jennifer write a note would shield them whenever her body was found. For reasons unknown, the group made Jennifer take several antibiotics, painkillers, and pills before Ricky Smirms asked Melvin to stab her in the chest. This could either be due to an unexpected return of their conscience, or an attempt to prolong Jennifer's suffering using medicines. The latter stands more probable, since they didn't spare the life of the already tortured Jennifer. Thus, any consideration of the Greensburg Six's empathy towards their unfortunate victim was completely out of the question. Instead, Melvin plunged a knife into Jennifer's body thrice, striking her chest and her throat. He later checked on her to find that she was still alive and slashed her wrist to end Jennifer's life. The group didn't immediately dispose of Jennifer's body. Angela Marinucci asked the group to prop the dead body up and wrap it in Christmas lighting to get a dazzling display of their monstrosity. But when the damaged Christmas lights didn't work, the frustrated group stuffed her body in a trash can where it was eventually found. All of this clearly showcased that none of the sects had any form of remorse over their actions. But what really made them carry out this torture cum murder? After learning of such a horrifying account, cops cracked down hard on everyone to find out why they made Jennifer suffer so much. The Greensburg Six revealed that Jennifer had developed a crush on Ricky, who was Angela's boyfriend at the time. Moreover, Angela once caught Ricky secretly speaking with Jennifer over the phone. This made her furious with jealousy, following which she decided to punish her new friend for crossing the line and hatched a plan with Amber. Cops found that this flow of romance wasn't one way, as Ricky later revealed that he loved Jennifer as well. Both had confessed their love to each other and had also been intimate on a few occasions behind Angela's back. This really made the detectives think as to why Ricky participated or even approved of whatever happened with Jennifer. Especially, he could have avoided everything by simply warning Jennifer and asking her not to come for the sleepover. The confession from the other members of the Greensburg Six, especially Peggy Miller and Robert Masters, revealed that Angela was a very dangerous woman, and they were very afraid of her. Peggy and Robert also said they didn't participate in any of the violence and were willing to cooperate with the police and get a plea deal in court. However, the fear analogy didn't stand true for everyone, especially Melvin Knight, who seemed to have enjoyed torturing and assaulting Jennifer the most. Nevertheless, when things came down to the point for each member to vote, none of them voted to let Jennifer live despite having made her go through a hellish nightmare. However, the police now had what they needed to get justice for Jennifer Daugherty. The hearing for the case began on November 3, 2010, revealing that Angela, Ricky, and Jennifer had a very complex love triangle, with Ricky being at the center of it all. Angela had actually overheard Ricky speaking with Jennifer when she had heard him saying that he loved her and wanted to marry her. This made Angela fume with rage since she had been his girlfriend for several years. The state of Pennsylvania had never seen a heinous and violent crime of this degree. On August 3, 2011, when giving the verdict, the court found the charges against Angela serious enough for death penalty. But since she was only 17 at the time of the incident, she ended up receiving life imprisonment without parole for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Due to certain unrelated developments, her sentence saw some revisions, with the final order coming in May 2022. Angela is now undergoing her sentence and would be eligible for parole only in February 1970. Ricky eligible for parole only in February 1970. Ricky Smyrns and Melvin Knight, however, received the death penalty on February 28, 2013 and April 12, 2012 respectively. Knight later challenged his sentence in September 2014, stating that the jury was prejudiced towards him, but the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania upheld his sentence twice. Speaking about her judgment on Knight, Pennsylvania Supreme Court's Chief Justice Deborah Todd said that the jury was not biased in its judgment to give the death penalty to Melvin Knight. She instead noted that the decision was made after a thorough examination of a large pool of evidence, which proved Knight and the rest of the Greensburg Six having Jennifer, a mentally challenged woman, to several forms of assault and torture, eventually killing her. Amber Menninger pled guilty to third-degree murder, conspiracy, and kidnapping, though she had initially tried to get some relief citing her pregnancy. Once she found out she could be facing the death penalty, she chose to cooperate as a witness and received a sentence of 40 to 80 years in prison on December 4, 2013. Prior to the trial, Peggy Miller and Robert Masters had already agreed to testify as witnesses. During the trial, Robert revealed that he had almost helped Jennifer in escaping and also returned her clothes while Melvin and Ricky were outside the house, but they returned before Jennifer could flee from the place. The courts, however, noted that neither Peggy nor Roberts chose to inform the police of what happened and only came forward as witnesses to get plea deals. Although they didn't participate in any of the violence, they did help in keeping Jennifer hostage and also voted to kill her. Peggy received a sentence of 35 to 74 years, and Robert got a sentence of 30 to 70 years on March 1734. The accounts of Peggy and Robert also ushered in a need for a law in Pennsylvania to charge anybody witnessing a violent crime and withholding the information from the police with third-degree murder. This law was proposed by Senator Kim Ward in 2012, and he tabled the proposal as Jennifer's Law. Speaking at the trial of the murderers of her sister, Joy Buckholder said, "Jennifer was exploited. Her kindness and her handicap made her very vulnerable. She did not have a single mean bone in her body." The tragic murder of Jennifer Daugherty is undoubtedly one of the most horrifying cases, not only due to the brutal nature of the crime but also because of the betrayal by the very people she trusted. Her parents' grief is compounded by the fact that they had envisioned a future for Jennifer where she could live more independently, surrounded by supportive France. Instead, that hope was crushed in the most brutal way imaginable. As for whether the Greensburg Six were driven to commit such a heinous act due to their mental challenges, or if they were capable of such cold-blooded behavior all along, it's a complex question. It's essential to consider that mental health challenges can influence behavior, but they don't inherently excuse or justify violent actions. Some may argue that their cognitive or psychological struggles played a role in how they interacted with Jennifer, but it doesn't necessarily mean they were incapable of making decisions and understanding the consequences of their actions. At the same time, their disturbing behavior and the deliberate nature of the crime suggest that it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment act driven by mental illness. The crimes seem premeditated, and the actions taken to cover it up were calculated. It raises a difficult moral and legal question. How much of their actions can be attributed to their mental health, and how much to personal choice and accountability? The tragedy of Jennifer's death remains a stark reminder that we must look at the complexities of mental health, the impact of those challenges on behavior, and the extent to which personal responsibility still plays a role in such horrific acts. Relisha Rudd. Relisha Rudd was an 8-year-old girl from Washington, D.C. For over a year, her family had been living in a homeless shelter located in the former D.C. General Hospital. It was the largest shelter in the district, accommodating hundreds of families and up to 600 children. In March 2014, a counselor at Relisha's elementary school noticed that she had been absent from classes for an entire month. Some of her absences had been excused by a Dr. Khalil Tatum. Concerned, the school counselor contacted a social worker to look into Relisha's prolonged absence. This inquiry led to the discovery that Dr. Tatum was actually Khalil Tatum, a janitor at the shelter Relisha stayed at. In late February, Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, asked Tatum to care for her. She later said she wanted Relisha to be able to escape the conditions at the shelter, which was filthy, chaotic, crime-ridden, infested with vermin, and had no playground. Relisha was last seen at a hotel which captured her and Tatum checking in to a Holiday Inn in Washington, D.C. Authorities started a search for Tatum and Relisha after a social worker filed a missing persons report. It was discovered that Tatum had murdered his wife, Andrea Tatum, inside motel. A witness claimed that he helped Tatum make an internet search relating to the murder. Investigators believe Tatum shot his wife to death that night or early the next morning. They had been in the process of a divorce. Her body was found in a motel room in Oxon Hill, Maryland. Tatum and Relisha were both missing, prompting authorities to launch an urgent search, fearing for the child's safety. Tatum was already wanted for car theft, and after his wife's body was discovered, he was also charged with murder. His criminal history included multiple arrests for breaking and entering, but his only prior felony conviction had been for decades earlier. Investigators found that on March 1st, Tatum had purchased a box of 42-gallon trash bags along with lye, a substance known to accelerate decomposition. Authorities later stated that he had murdered Relisha. On March 31st, Tatum's body was discovered in Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens. He had died by suicide using the same gun that was used to kill his wife. Despite extensive searches, there has been no trace of Relisha to this day. Moving on to the next case. Elena Lazwell. After 2 decades of searching for answers, a crucial breakthrough has finally surfaced in the case of Elena Teresa Adele Lazwell. The 15-year-old, whose life was tragically stolen, has remained at the heart of a relentless investigation for the past 20 years. Her brutal death on July 10, 2004, left an unfillable void in the lives of her family and community. Now, on the 20th anniversary of her passing, a long-awaited arrest has reignited hope in a case that had seemingly gone cold. Born on January 17, 1989, in Phoenix, Arizona, Elena was cherished by her family, her parents, Steve and Molly, her 4 brothers, and her sister, who held her in the highest regard. Growing up, she was deeply involved in team sports, had a passion for creating art, and shared a special connection with animals. She attended several local schools, including St. Gregory's Catholic School, Serene Elementary School, and Phoenix Preparatory Academy, from which she graduated in May 2004. Elena eagerly looked forward to starting North High School that coming February, filled with dreams and aspirations for her future. Dreams that would be cruelly shattered by an unimaginable act of violence. On the evening of July 10, 2004, at approximately 8 p.m., Police responded to a distressing 911 call from a residence on North 21st Drive in Phoenix, Arizona. Upon arrival, officers were directed to a room where they discovered 15-year-old Elena Lazwell, gravely injured and clinging to life. Despite immediate emergency intervention, Elena was tragically pronounced deceased at the scene. The case was swiftly turned over to homicide detectives, who pursued every possible lead. However, despite their tireless efforts and extensive investigations, no suspects were identified, and the case eventually went cold. For years, Elena's family and the Phoenix Police Department endured the unbearable frustration of an unsolved crime, with little hope of resolution. Then, years later, a crucial breakthrough emerged. In 2012, advancements in DNA technology allowed detectives to re-examine evidence from the crime scene. Utilizing cutting-edge forensic techniques, investigators were able to extract a DNA profile that led them to a match, Sergio Francisco Reyes. By March 2013, forensic evidence had definitively identified Reyes as a primary suspect, reigniting the case and offering renewed hope for justice. Sergio Reyes was 17 years old at the time of the crime in February 2004, and his connection to the tragedy was not immediately known to investigators. Reyes was indicted by Maricopa County Grand Jury in February 2014. But because he was residing in Mexico at the time, extradition procedures were required to bring him back to the United States. This process involved cooperation with U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities. On July 10, 2024, the 20th anniversary of Elena's passing, Reyes was arrested and extradited to Phoenix. He faces multiple charges, including first-degree assault, kidnapping, and burglary. His bond was set at $1,500,000. The Phoenix Police Department has not disclosed whether Reyes had any prior connection to Elena. Elena's family, including her parents and siblings, have expressed a mixture of relief and continued sorrow. Her aunt Katie Treville said, "Knowing that someone is being held responsible feels awesome. It has been a long haul, and thank God for Phoenix PD. They have been absolutely amazing. I just really felt that they were on the right trail and that they would get it. I just did not know when." Elena's mother had passed away in the years since her daughter's slaying. But Katie said the mother's wish was not revenge. She wonders what Elena's life could have been. Wondering, you know what? Would she be married? What would she be doing now? Elena's mother described Reyes as a monster, emphasizing how difficult it is to recognize true evil in the real world, far different from the depictions of monsters in childhood stories. Her father, Steve Lazwell, admitted that after 2 decades, he had lost hope of any further progress in the case. "To be truthful, I really wasn't expecting anything more to come of it," he said. "Having him arrested means preventing him from doing anything like this again. That was the primary hope." Despite the years that have passed, the loss of Elena remains ever present in their lives. "We all continue to miss Elena, and we think about what she might have been today," Steve added. He expressed deep gratitude to the Phoenix Police Department and all those who remained dedicated to seeking justice for his daughter. Now, as the legal process moves forward, the family's grief is tempered by a sense of closure, knowing that the person responsible for their daughter's tragic fate will finally be held accountable. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Renee Odom. 12-year-old Jennifer Renee Odom was a 7th grader at Thomas E. Whiteman Middle School in Wesley Chapel, Florida, in 1993. She played the clarinet in the school band and was also a talented barefoot water skier, often reaching the top of the human pyramid in tournaments. Jennifer was born on August 25, 1980, as the eldest daughter of Renee Converse and her stepfather Clark Converse. She had a younger sister, 9-year-old Jessica and Odom, and was the granddaughter of Jim and Margie Denny. The family lived in St. Joseph, a small community near Dade City, Florida. Jennifer and Jessica shared a deep bond, playing with their rabbit named Beanie, riding four-wheelers, building forts, and swimming in the creek behind their house on the family's 15-acre property. Jennifer was known for her love of the outdoors, spending plenty of time outside, which gave her a tan and kept her fit. She had a special bond with her Springer Spaniel, Gypsy. On the crisp morning of Friday, February 19, 1993, Jennifer wore her white jeans, a white turtleneck, and a red cashmere sweater, a gift from her grandmother. Her shoulder-length chestnut hair framed her face as she prepared for school. After lacing up her black boots, Jennifer and her mother drove the 200 yards up their winding lime rock driveway to wait for the school bus by their mailbox. Jennifer climbed onto the bus and took her usual spot on the back seat, so she and her mother could see each other until Renee, following behind, turned left to head to work. After school at around 3 p.m., Jennifer stepped off her school bus, waved goodbye to her friends, and started walking the short 200 yards to her home. At about 4 p.m., Jennifer's sister arrived at their home from school to find it locked and unable to enter. She then called their mother to tell her that her big sister was not home yet. Renee Converse then realized Jennifer must not have made it home. Jennifer's mother called her best friend, Michelle, who confirmed that she had seen Jennifer exit the bus and start walking home. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Jennifer's mother immediately contacted the police. Within hours, deputies initiated a large-scale search. A group of approximately 400 volunteers joined the effort, covering around 60 square miles of countryside. Family, friends, neighbors, and other volunteers scoured the area. Law enforcement brought in police dogs to comb through the rolling groves, pastures, and wooded areas surrounding the small Pasco County town of Dade City. All local law enforcement agencies were on the lookout for a blue truck that had been seen near the scene. Some of Jennifer's classmates recalled seeing an older light blue pickup truck slowly trailing Jennifer as she walked down the road. The children noted that the truck had a silver-painted rear bumper, not chrome, along with a trailer hitch that had wires hanging from it and pipes or a ladder in the back. The driver was described as a white male in his 40s with shoulder-length brown hair. The blue truck was the focus of the search parties as investigators believed that the driver may have been involved in the disappearance of Jennifer. As a last resort to find the truck, the FBI as well as Hernando and Pasco County Sheriff's personnel worked from a dock and boathouse as drivers searched Lake Jovita for the vehicle. 6 days after Jennifer vanished, on Thursday, February 25th, a man and a woman searching an abandoned orange grove about 10 miles north of Jennifer's school bus stop found her badly decomposed nude body. Her body was found near a horse trail off Powell Road south of Brooksville, amid a cluster of pine trees in the orange grove. She was found viciously assaulted and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Detectives believe that Jennifer likely lost her life in the woods shortly after her disappearance. Hernando County Sheriff, L. Ninhuiz, remarked, "We are not exactly sure how long her abductor kept her captive or when exactly the slaying took place, but we are relatively confident it took place in that field." He continued, "Every one of us, including those in law enforcement, can look at Jennifer as our niece, our sister, our granddaughter, and realize that it is a tragedy beyond tragedy." Despite extensive searches, Jennifer's clothing was never found, nor was the blue truck or its driver. As Jennifer's family focused on her funeral arrangements, country music star Vince Gill was scheduled to perform at the local Strawberry Festival on Monday, March 1, 1993. Jennifer's stepfather, Clark Converse, shared that the girls had been excited for weeks to see Gill perform and hoped they could get his autograph. Before the concert, Clark and Jessica went to the festival to honor Jennifer's wish for him to autograph a photo from a previous concert where the girls had posed with him. Between shows, Festival Vice President Joe Newsom brought the 3 snapshots to Gill, who was eating dinner. Clark Converse had asked that Gill sign 1 photo for Jessica, 1 for Jennifer, and 1 for both girls. Newsom recalled, "I told Gill this young lady had been slayed and her dad was outside." Gill replied that he remembered hearing about the incident. He, who also had a young daughter, autographed the photos, writing on one to Jennifer, "May God be with you," as both Gill and Newsom wept. Gill then went to the night's second show. Before singing the last song, he told the audience about Jennifer. "I'm going to try to get through this the best I can," Gill said, his voice cracking. He sang his Grammy-winning hit, "I Still Believe in You," and dedicated it to Jennifer, whose life had been tragically taken. Midway through the song, with tears streaming down his face, Gill asked the crowd to help him finish. Nearly 15,000 voices joined in. Radio personality Jeff Moore, who stood backstage, observed the scene with tears in his own eyes. "It was heart-ripping," he said afterward. Unfortunately, despite the emotional tribute, no one in the community provided investigators with useful information, and Jennifer's case remained unsolved. In a chilling twist, just 13 months before Jennifer's abduction, on January 16, 1992, a 17-year-old girl had been kidnapped as she got off a school bus in north-central Pasco County. She was found in a pool of blood behind an abandoned house, brutally attacked, assaulted, and beaten. Sheriff Mean, who has reported that she suffered significant head and skull injuries. Miraculously, she survived, but her life was forever altered, leaving her paralyzed on her left side. Ninhu has emphasized that she was a former honor roll student and track and field participant, leading an ordinary life and not engaged in any high-risk behavior. Law enforcement had collected DNA from the crime scene, and detectives noted similarities between the attacks on Jennifer and the unnamed girl. They suspected the cases may be connected. Both victims were adolescent girls who were abducted after getting off of the school bus in Pasco County, taken to a remote field, assaulted, and abandoned with the belief they will succumb to their injuries. The other victim was found just a few miles from where Jennifer's body was found. After a series of blind alleys, the police called upon psychic Nancy Mayer, 16 months after the incident, to assist in finding the person responsible for what happened. Nancy Meyer is a psychic from Pennsylvania who has been working with police around the country for decades. According to Nancy, she had consulted and offered critical clues more than 80% of the time. Nancy believed that two men were involved in taking Jennifer's life. She described them as white muscular mechanics, and she said one may be a smoker with a heavy cough. The crime scene photographs were classified. Therefore, Nancy Mayer was not allowed to see it. Despite this, she was able to visualize two men in detail. She was taken to the site where Jennifer's body was found. Nancy pointed out that there were belongings in a nearby area that had not yet been discovered. She was able to describe several of Jennifer's items that were still missing, including her cousin's clarinet case with the letters LO on them. She continued to give information about the perpetrators in hope of solving the case. Detective Carlos Douglas of the Hernando County Sheriff's Office said, "Nancy Mayer was extremely accurate on some things that led us to look in other areas that we had not thought of. So we obtained a lot of information from what she had to offer." On December 2, 1994, Jennifer's unsolved case was aired on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on national TV. After the show aired, more than 50 phone tips and even more investigative leads from around the country arrived by mail at the Hernando County Sheriff's Office. A spokesman of the Sheriff's Office said the show did for us what we wanted it to do. It got us some more exposure. Despite the new exposure, former Hernando County Sheriff's Major Gary Zorn Smith, who oversaw the investigation in its early years, said the investigators were stumped. He said there was a strong possibility the crime would go unsolved. "And what's even worse is that if we solve it, it may take another crime to do it," he said at the time. Approximately 2 years after Jennifer's body was found, on Thursday, January 5, 1995, a couple hunting for scrap metal in a rural area of Hernando County discovered Jennifer's missing book bag and clarinet case. It was found several miles from the location of her body. Police were able to lift fingerprints from her backpack and clarinet case from what is believed to be the person responsible. Unfortunately, there was never a hit in the database for a suspect matching these fingerprints. Over the years, the case garnered national attention and haunted the Tampa Bay region. $1,000 in reward money offered for tips went unclaimed. Detectives logged tens of 1,000 of hours chasing leads. Jennifer's family waited for news as the years turned to decades. Jennifer's mother, Renee Converse, wondered if it was somebody Jennifer knew. Clark Converse, Jennifer's stepfather, added, "There is a real chance that the person who did it is somebody we have contact with. If they catch someone, we're going to be thrown into the spotlight. Learning how to deal with a trial and confronting this person is going to throw us to square one in learning to deal with this." Renee said she cries a bit more each year. "The reality is that Jennifer is gone and will never be in our lives again. Nothing is going to change that." She also said that the family is thankful for what they do know. "We are blessed that we have this much closure. We are not looking for her. We know where she is. It is going to be a bittersweet finale. She could still picture her 12-year-old daughter, slim and sun-kissed, waving goodbye out the back window of the Pasco County school bus. It was the last time she would see her brown-eyed firstborn girl. Renee recounts the last words being spoken between the two as "I love you." The couple said they have done everything possible to cooperate in finding Jennifer Slayer. They wanted the person found so that no one else got hurt. On Monday, February 19, 2007, the St. Petersburg Times reported that it marked 14 years since the unsolved abduction and subsequent slaying of Jennifer. In that same year, members of Hernando County Crime Stoppers handed out special playing cards to inmates at the Hernando County Detention Center. Each card featured a brief description of an unsolved case from around the state and a hotline number. Jennifer's card was the Queen of Diamonds and featured 2 color photos. A website has been set up by the Hernando Sheriff's Office with pictures and information about Jennifer. A slideshow was also put together with photos of Jennifer set to a mournful soundtrack. Hernando County Detective George Lloyd Grenlater headed the cold case unit. He was armed with the latest DNA technology and a disturbing theory. "I believe that there is probably one person, if not more, that would know who is responsible for this," he said. He also believed that person could be a family member or ex-spouse, either protecting the perpetrator or too afraid to come forward. "I think the reason people do not want to get involved is they may not want to sit there and have to testify against that individual." Over the years, a couple of anonymous tips came in that led investigators to believe that there are several people out there with more information, and the investigators wanted them to come forward. They tried various methods of generating new leads, from billboards and a $20,000 reward to a documentary on national TV. Investigators amassed some 1,000 pieces of evidence, took thousands of tips, and conducted hundreds of interviews over time to try to determine who took Jennifer's life. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reached out to the sheriff's office and offered to scan every piece of paper in Jennifer's case, so it will be readily available. It was more than 75,000 pieces of paper. During all the investigations, there were clues, including the fingerprints on Jennifer's clarinet case and backpack. There were also suspects. Serial offender Frank Thaniel Potts was a possible suspect. He assaulted a 10-year-old girl in Lakeland in 1993. At the time of the slaying, he was working on a construction site in Pasco County and owned a blue pickup truck, which he allegedly later dismantled. Authorities were unable to link him to Jennifer's case. However, another possible suspect was Walter Ducharme, who lived in the area at the time of the slaying. His ex-wife claimed that he was responsible for it. However, her testimony was inconsistent. When the case against him was presented to a grand jury, he was not indicted. He was no longer believed to be involved in the case. In February 2015, Detective George Lundgren was contacted by Pasco County Sheriff Chris Nacco. According to him, new technology had led to a solid lead in the 1992 case in which the teenage girl was found alive. It was the case investigators believed was linked to Jennifer's. The odds of finding another match, Nacco said, was 1 in 7.7, a number with 30 zeros. Lloyd Gren commented, "I think DNA is going to be a big part of Jennifer's case, as it is with any of the old cases, because items were collected. It is just now that the technology has advanced." The biological evidence found in the investigation of the 1992 case was tested before February 2015, and detectives got a full DNA profile. Investigators used a DNA procedure known as familial searching, which allows law enforcement to find a suspect by comparing male DNA left at the scene with that of family members. The shortfall of a standard DNA search is that a suspect's genetic fingerprint must be on file in the offender database for law enforcement to make a match. Araf Ninhu said until February 2015, there were no leads on that particular piece of DNA. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement compared the DNA to local DNA to see if there were any close matches, which would be a family member. The sheriff said they found the DNA matched that of Jeffrey Crum, who was in jail at the time. Investigators then obtained DNA samples from Crum's brother, father, and grandfather. A direct comparison between the DNA found on the victim and that of Crum's father found a match. Investigators concluded that Jeffrey Crum took the girl from the 1992 case by the arm and led her behind the abandoned house, where he hit her head with a blunt object so hard it crushed part of her skull and caused her to lose part of her brain, leaving her paralyzed on the one side. This then finally led to the arrest of Jeffrey Crum, 53 years old at the time, in connection to the 1992 case. It was Crum's arrest in this case, authorities said, that made him a person of interest, reinvigorating an investigation in Jennifer's case. Sheriff L. Ninja said when Crum was implicated in the 1992 case, he quickly, almost instantaneously became our #1 suspect in Jennifer's case because of the similarities. He also noted that over the years there were suspects, but Crum was not on that list, so he came out of left field in February 2015. In February 2018, on the 25th anniversary of her daughter's demise, Jennifer's mother told the Times that she and other family members tried to have faith that her case would eventually be solved. I think the investigators would have done anything in the world to have solved this case. In February 2019, Crum was sentenced to life in prison for the crime he committed in 1992, leaving his victim partly paralyzed. The victim's aunt spoke in court during the sentencing hearing, recounting the lifelong damage he had inflicted. Her aunt said her life stopped that day. She also mentioned Jennifer. A year later, a young lady, Jennifer Odom, was slayed, she said, and that brought back so much different things that today, the perpetrator still has not been caught. The arrest and sentence of Crum gave Detective Lloyd Grant a new resolve, and Jennifer's family new hope that the person responsible will be caught. Detectives then began an intensive investigation and interviewed everyone they could find for the next several years that may have been associated with Crum around the time Jennifer was kidnapped. This information was turned over to the state attorney, and the facts and circumstances were turned over to a grand jury. On July 27, 2023, a month shy of what would have been Jennifer's 43rd birthday, officials announced that they had finally made an arrest in the case and that prosecutors would seek capital punishment against the accused. State Attorney Bill Glass made the announcement during a press conference. This was just after the Hernando County Sheriff's Office announced that it has charged the 61-year-old Jeffrey Norman Crum with the kidnapping, assault, and slaying of Jennifer 30 years before. Glass also said, "I have confidence that we have the right person, and we have the right aggravators in this particular case to treat it as a capital punishment case. This is every parent's nightmare. This is the thing that keeps parents up at night worried about their children." Detective George Loigren, who had spent years investigating Jennifer's case, said shock is probably the best word to describe the reaction of Jennifer's family when he told them about the arrest. He said he did it quickly because I did not want to get emotional. It is a lot for them to take in and absorb, and I can imagine it is going to take some time before it really sinks in. According to Sheriff Neen, who is every viable lead for the past 30 years, including those that came from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or private citizens were investigated thoroughly. He added the investigation never stopped. Hundreds of items were tested and retested every time new technology came out in the hope of finding a smoking gun to solve this case. The sheriff added literally countless detectives and sworn law enforcement personnel and civilian and tipsters have had a hand in this investigation. The minute Crum was identified as a suspect in the case, Detective Lundgren went to work putting a mosaic together or a puzzle. And I can tell you, other than a conviction in a previous case, there was no other piece of the puzzle. That was a big piece of the puzzle. Every other piece of the puzzle that got us to this point were tiny little fragments that gave the state attorney and the grand jury enough confidence to indict Crum. Sheriff Mianuis also said that they are searching for additional victims. Authorities fear Crum may be responsible for other crimes. A picture of him from 1993 was released, asking that anyone who recognized him from the 1980s-1990s to contact Sheriff Nienhuis. We urge anyone who had interactions with this individual, has information on other crimes he may have committed, and or may have themselves been a victim of Jeffrey Crum to reach out to the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and speak to our cold case unit. Despite keeping a lot of information close to the vest, authorities did say that in 1992, Crum worked in construction as a drywall installer and lived on Somerset Lane in Spring Hill, the Pasco County area where Jennifer was abducted from. His residence was about 21 miles from the place where Jennifer was last seen and 12 miles from where her body was found. Officials also say at that time he drove a blue truck. During Thursday, July press conference, Sheriff Min Weiss kept reiterating Crum was not on the investigators' radar until the past few years. Records showed Crum has a significant history of convictions for violent crime. The sheriff said Crum had been arrested in the early 1980s for armed robbery in Hillsborough County. In 1985, he was charged with kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment in Hillsborough County. He was arrested by Tampa police in 1987 for carrying a concealed weapon. In 1988, he was caught again carrying a concealed weapon and was charged with aggravated assault. In 1998, he was arrested for domestic violence in Hernando County 3 times. In February 2001, he was arrested for violation of probation in Hillsborough County. He was arrested a few years later for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Hernando County. In 2015, he was arrested in Pasco County for aggravated assault on a child under the age of 12. Sheriff Ninhu has stated, "He is a bad individual who enjoyed violence." Crum is already serving 2 life sentences for the assault and kidnapping case out of Pasco County that was prosecuted around February 2015. He is currently in the Hernando County Jail. Judge Kurt E. Hitzman ordered him to be held without bond and appointed a public defender to represent him. Communities in Pasco and Hernando counties were left shaken after Jennifer Odom's abduction and slaying. When news of the arrest was announced, many residents shared their thoughts and feelings. Gene Cameron, the general manager at Papa Joe's Italian restaurant in Brooksville, recalled how the community was deeply affected by Jennifer's disappearance. "We all remember hearing about her disappearance, Jennifer's, and about the blue truck. Everyone was on alert, looking for answers. I think the bottom line was finding out who did it and getting him off the streets so that another family doesn't have to suffer." She said, "I really feel like the whole community was tormented until they found out the answer." Joseph Gyraton, the owner of Papa Joe's, expressed his anger as a parent, recalling how furious he was when he learned someone could do such a thing to a child and leave her abandoned. "Back then, 30 years ago, as a parent, I was very angry that someone could do something like that to a child and then leave her there in the middle of nowhere," he said. Jessica Ellis, who went to Whiteman Middle School with Jennifer and played in the same clarinet section, remembered Jennifer as always being kind. "We saw each other a lot. We weren't really close friends, but we knew a lot of the same people. We rode the school bus every day, and I just remember her always being nice to me and everyone else who knew her on the bus." She added, "Now, a lot of us are parents ourselves, and the fact that anyone could do something like this to a child makes me hold my 5-year-old a lot tighter now." Grief and fear lingered in the community in the years following Jennifer's tragic death, but the arrest of Crum provided a sense of closure for many. In September 2019, 2 siblings, identified as 16-year-old Tylee Ashlyn Ryan and 7-year-old Joshua Jackson Vallow, vanished without a trace from their home in Rexburg, Idaho. It's a bizarre case involving murder, doomsday predictions, and 2 missing children spanning several states. No one has seen JJ and Tylee since September, but it wasn't until late November 2019 when they were reported missing. The day before Thanksgiving, 2 detectives knocked on my door, and they asked me, "Do you know where Tylee is? Do you know where JJ is?" Months later, an investigation led the detectives to the discovery of the children's cold, lifeless bodies buried in a pet cemetery. The detectives were only scratching the surface of a disturbing case, unaware of the morbid secrets it held. The case became one of the most horrific when a mysterious pattern of murders and bizarre cult beliefs was linked to it. What really happened with Tylee and Joshua? Who could have done something so evil to a couple of innocent children? Rexburg is a city in Madison County, Idaho, United States. It's a thriving college town and hence is enormously loved by students. Set within an hour's drive of 2 major national parks, Yellowstone and Teton, the city offers its residents the chance to experience the beauty and peacefulness of nature, as well as the wildlife. However, Idaho undeniably takes the crown for producing the best potatoes and its variant dishes. The state serves plenty of other culinary gems including plump purple huckleberries, ruby red trout, artisan cheese, and honeycomb-topped morel mushrooms. In terms of crime rate, Rexburg is considered quite safe. The chances of becoming a victim of a violent crime in Rexburg are 1 in 2,942, making it safer than 82% of all U.S. neighborhoods. But yet, back in 2019, One of the most horrid crimes took place here which left the city in great shock. Laurie Ryan Daybell, also referred to as Laurie Vallow-Daybell, was born to Laurie Noreen Cox Bariel and Janice L. Cox on June 26, 1973 in Loma Linda, California. Not a lot is known about Laurie's childhood, but she did have a pretty normal life growing up with her older brother Alexander and sister Summer. She's beautiful. She's sweet. She's kind. She's generous to a fault. In 1992, at the age of 19, Laurie married her high school sweetheart, Nelson Yanes. But their union was a suffocating one for both of them, and the marriage didn't last very long. They ended up divorcing after just a few months. He wasn't my favorite, and we didn't have close relationship, and so we didn't go to the wedding. By the time Laurie was 22 years old, she married a man named William Ligiawa in October 1995. The couple had a son named Colby in 1996, but unfortunately, that same year, Laurie and William got a divorce after just a year of marriage. We weren't in favor of him even though he was Colby's father. In February 2001, Laurie married Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr., who legally adopted Colby, Laurie's son, from her last marriage. They were beautiful. They were magnanimous. They were both extroverts. They were, just kind of larger than life. One reason Laurie had wanted to get married was to have another baby. So she got pregnant with Tylee right away, and she was really excited about having Tylee. At the same time, Laurie, Joseph, and Colby were living in Phoenix, Maricopa County, Arizona, which was where Tylee spent her early childhood. But again, after only 4 years of marriage, Laurie and Joseph got divorced in February 2005. I did witness him be physically abusive toward Colby. He was physically abusive from the very get-go. Shortly after splitting from Joseph, Laurie married her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, in February 2006. This is another failed marriage for Laurie. Enter Charles Vallow, a man who will eventually become husband number 4. I don't know why Laurie's been married so many times. I think she thinks that she is trying to help people when she marries them. Laurie, Colby, and Tyle moved into Charles's home in Chandler, Arizona with Charles and his 2 sons, Zach and Cole, from his previous marriage. Charles Vallow, to me, was the best of Laurie's husbands. They had been dating and we all liked him. I felt like he was a great husband. I felt like he adored Laurie and that he would go out of his way to make her comfortable, to make her happy. In February 2013, the family of 6 welcomed another member into their lives. Charles and Laurie adopted Joshua Jackson Vallow, the biological grandson of Charles's sister, Kay Woodcock. Joshua was the youngest member of the family, and hence the most pampered. Everyone referred to him as JJ. JJ was born as Keenan Todd Tryon to a couple named Mandy Ledger and Todd Tryon on May 5, 2012 in Lake Charles, Louisiana. However, Mandy and Todd soon learned that JJ had autism, and being a young struggling couple, they were not able to meet JJ's special needs. It was then that they decided to let Charles and Laurie raise JJ. JJ is my biological grandson via my son, and Charles is my brother. Charles and Laurie adopted JJ, and they let us maintain the grandparents' role. In February 2014, Laurie and Charles, along with the kids, moved to Kauai, Hawaii, and lived there for about 3 years before returning to Arizona in 2017. By 2018, 15-year-old Tylee had grown up to be a simple teenage girl living a normal life just like any other person her age. Tylee is the dearest little girl. You need someone to cuddle with, but you don't have a significant other? Worry no more. She has tough exterior, but she's got a marshmallow heart. Tylee loved driving her Jeep and going out with her friends. She was only a few years short of turning into a young woman and held on tight to her unique sense of humor. But her jolly nature was snatched away when her biological father, Laurie's third husband, 59-year-old Joseph, died of a heart attack in April 2018. In 2019, when Tylee was finally recovering, trying to put her father's death behind her, another tragedy struck. On July 11, 2019, 62-year-old Charles Vallow was shot and killed in Chandler, Arizona by Laurie's brother, Alex Cox. What is the emergency? I shot my brother-in-law. And was he armed also? Or just he came at me with a bat? Anyone been drinking or doing drugs or anything today or no? I don't know. But I've never seen him that enraged before. Okay. What part of his body is injured? In the chest. Okay. Is he awake and responsive or unconscious? Unconscious. Alex claims self-defense and alleged that he confronted Charles about abusing Lori and used his gun only when Charles struck him with a baseball bat. No weapon, no epithermy. All right, come on out this way. Oddities. There are a few at this scene. Do you have some ID on you, sir? Yeah. Alex Cox is supposedly performing CPR on a guy that has 2 bullet holes in his chest, and that is going to be an incredibly messy and bloody business. But when the police get there, when you look at the footage, he doesn't appear to have any blood on his body at all. He was just yelling at me. He came at me with a bat. K. Was he living there or no? Visiting? Let me see your head. You got a laceration. Do you want me to call paramedics? No. I'd really like the monitor though. Tylee, who was at home at the time the incident took place, gave a version of events similar to the one described by her uncle. After Charles's death, Tylee was the only one JJ was close to. Tylee tried her best to protect him and just be there for him. She tended to his needs and looked after him as much as she could. JJ and Tylee meant the world to each other. Moving on with their lives, Lori shifted to Rexburg, Idaho with JJ and Tylee while Colby moved away. Tylee was against this move as she didn't want to leave her friends, but eventually came to terms with it as looking after JJ was her priority. I loved being around JJ and Tylee. Tylee was really protective over JJ and she was kind of like another mama to him. Are you taking a video of my child? Your child? My child. Lori had decided to move because she'd fallen in love with a man named Chad Daybell who lived in Rexburg. Lori and Chad started spending most of their time together and got married on November 5, 2019 on a beach in Hawaii. In October 2019, Tylee made 2 Venmo payments to her older half-brother Colby Ryan from her account. Along with the payments, she'd also attached messages expressing her love and telling Colby that she missed him. Colby found this a little odd and concerning as he'd been trying to contact Tylee, but she hadn't been responding. She's usually using emojis. So that's kind of the one thing that you can already tell, like, it seems, and it's really quick response. It was so, like, push me away. Every time I ask her to call me, just push it to the side. I'm busy, and that doesn't make sense. After these heartfelt messages, when Colby tried to reach out to Tylee again, he received messages from her cell phone telling him that she was fine, but too busy to talk. And the fact that this week is busy, like, what does that have to do with right now? And I just tried to push her a little bit just to get her to call me. It didn't seem like a difficult task. After a few more failed attempts to get in touch with Tylee, Colby became more worried. Eventually, he convinced himself that Tylee really must be busy with her schoolwork and would contact him when she had the time. On November 26, 1939, JJ's grandparents, Kay Vallow Woodcock and Larry Woodcock, contacted Rexburg law enforcement, saying that they hadn't been able to contact their grandchild for several months. At that point is when Kay Woodcock contacted the Rexburg police and asked for a welfare check. And it was that welfare check that changed everything. The grandparents wanted to know if JJ was fine and, hence, asked the police to do a welfare check on him. The same day, Detective Ray Hermosillo visited Lori's house in Rexburg to check on JJ. Lori, I'm with Kent Ball Police Department. How are you? You got him in? So JJ would be where? He's in Arizona. Who's he with in Arizona? He's with one of my friends in Arizona. We moved up here in September. My daughter will go to BYUI. Your daughter goes to BYUI? Yeah. Does she live here? We had 2 detectives over here trying to looking for you a little while ago. Oh, because I was at the store. And they ran into, well, probably one of your brothers. My brother and his friend, probably. Oh, who's that? Moving. Chad. Chad from Ramsey? Chad. The Baybel. He is the one who passed away recently. I asked Mr. Daybell for Lori Vallow's phone number, and he stated he didn't have it. I found it suspicious because I knew that they were married 2 weeks prior to my contact with Mr. Daybell. I told Mr. Cox that was unlikely because Kay was the one who originally called in the welfare check. However, when the detectives contacted Melanie, she stated that JJ had not been with her for several months. And I felt in a very weird and uncomfortable position, and I really did not know what to do. Later that night, a neighbor saw Lori and Alex, Lori's older brother, leaving the house in a truck loaded with their packed bags. The following day, when the detectives arrived to question Lori again, they found the house abandoned. Melanie eventually contacted the police again and revealed that both Lori and Chad had asked her to lie about JJ's location, but she'd refused. According to Rexburg police, once they leave, Lori doubles back and calls Melanie Gibb, and she tells her, "Hey, Rexburg police is about to call you. I need you to tell them that JJ is with you." Melanie does tell police JJ was never with her. The detectives' efforts to locate JJ led to the discovery that Tylee too was missing. A search for 2 children from Idaho. Listen up. You may know something. The children mysteriously disappeared. An investigation was immediately launched to find the missing children. JJ's grandparents and many volunteers showed up to help law enforcement find Tylee and JJ. "We're just here for Tylee and JJ. We want to know where they're at, and we're hoping that they're alive and well." Kay and Larry Woodcock even offered a reward, hoping that someone might have some kind of information that could lead them to Tylee and JJ. They hold a press conference, and they announce a $20,000 reward for any information that will lead to finding JJ and Tylee. "If you have any information whatsoever, please call the authorities. We want Lori to please start cooperating with the police." However, the reward went unclaimed. On the other hand, the detectives were concerned about Lori and Chad's sudden departure from the city. They found it quite suspicious, but wondered whether the couple had something to do with the children or if they themselves were in trouble. But this question was soon answered when Detective Ray Hermosillo took a closer look into Lori and Chad's lives during his investigation and uncovered some intriguing information. Chad Guy Daybell was born on August 11, 1968 in Provo, Utah. On March 9, 1990, 21-year-old Chad married Tamara Douglas, commonly known as Tammy, in Manti, Utah. Chad Daybell and I served as missionaries for the LDS Church back in the late 80s. Chad was the most humble missionary that I ever knew. Even though he graduated from Brigham Young University in 1992 with a BA in journalism, he resorted to becoming a gravedigger while juggling other jobs. In February 2004, Chad founded Spring Creek Book Company, which he used to self-publish his fiction and other religious books. His books are all about the end of times and dying. His visions deal with dying. When Chad lived in Springville, Utah, he was a gravedigger. Chad started writing and presenting a mix of his religious and apocalyptic beliefs through his doomsday novels and podcasts. Chad was the author of these doomsday books that had a peculiar prophecy about the end of the world and how people should prepare for that. These novels and podcasts garnered a bunch of followers for Chad who, just like him, had equally ominous beliefs. In his memoir, Chad Daybell writes, "I don't fictionalize any of the events portrayed. My torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side. The scenes I am show are real events that will happen." In February 2015, Chad claimed that he heard a voice telling him to relocate to Rexburg, Idaho. In his memoir, Living on the Edge of Heaven, Chad Daybell describes being called to Rexburg. He writes, "A voice said, 'Moving to Rexburg will be a tremendous blessing on your children and your grandchildren.' He and Tammy, along with their 5 children, moved there from Springville, Utah in June that same year. Chad and Tammy moved here about 5 or 6 years ago with their family. Around February 2015, when Lori, Tylee, JJ, and Charles were living in Hawaii, Lori found out about Chad Daybell and became highly interested in his doomsday novels and podcasts. It was about this time that Lori's friends and Charles saw a change in Lori's behavior. Lori became enamored with Chad's ideas, and her relationship with her children started to worsen. So Lori had always been a fan of Chad's books. And so that's how I first heard about Chad from Lori, was she would talk about this author that she was really interested in and really connected with his work. She stopped paying attention to them and started treating them as if they were a burden on her. After following Chad's questionable works for more than 3 years, Chad and Lori finally met in person for the first time at a religious conference in Utah in October 2018. After their initial meeting, Chad went on a business trip, giving Lori the opportunity to invite Chad over. I'm just very honored to be part of the conference. I've recently released my autobiography entitled Living on the Edge of Heaven, where I tell more about my 2 near-death experiences and how that prompted me to write my novels. Chad and Lori started communicating privately afterwards, and he even told Lori that they had been married in 7 previous lifetimes. The first time Chad met Lori, he told her that they had been married in a past life and that they had lived this biblical life in the past. And instead of scaring her off, it seems to have attracted her. Chad categorized people as light or dark based on their affiliation with Jesus Christ or Satan. It was just like the list of our friends and family, and they are listed as light and dark spirits. We're both like, what does that mean, light and dark spirits? Chad referred to Lori as an eternal being. This belief system fascinated Lori, leading her to develop a strong attachment to Chad and his teachings. Lori kept on meeting Chad for the next few months. And on December 5, 2018, they appeared together on a podcast episode where they talked about their obsession with apocalyptic beliefs in order to gain more followers. About 10 years ago, I had this powerful spiritual experience because I had a breakdown. And that breakdown led me to realize how much I needed to change my life. My cars needed to change. Things started going wrong between Lori and Charles once she started obsessing over Chad and his books. Things were becoming worse by the day. But Charles reached his breaking point when Lori told him that she no longer cared about him or JJ. In February 2019, Charles filed for divorce stating that Lori was a threat to his and his children's lives. He even accused her of stealing his truck and $35,000 from their joint bank accounts. Charles Vallow alleges his business bank account has been drained as well, and that's when cops get called in. Why don't you come over here? Police body camera video shows Charles basically telling police that his wife has lost her mind. She took all the money out of her bank account today. Wait, what did she say yesterday? She said, "You're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did with Charles, but I can murder you now with my powers." So she's speaking as a spiritual being. Is she on any medications? No. She won't do medications. Has she been to the doctor? No. She won't go to the doctor because she's a translated being, and they would find out she's translated. She cannot be killed. She cannot die. And that's what she thinks? Yes. At the advice of his attorney, Charles got a restraining order against Lori. No. I've been a divorce attorney for 30 years, but I've never had anybody that came in that was this specific that said, "I'm afraid I'm going to be murdered, and this is who's going to do it, and here's why it's going to happen." He told me that Lori told him that she was going to have him killed, that he was in the way, and that she had an angel that would dispose of his body after that took place. And Charles was very adamant with me that he wanted to make sure that I let everybody know that if he was killed, shall we please bother? That it was Lori who didn't. He asked the authorities to make Lori go through mental health counseling, but she was deemed competent. Charles gets a court order to have Lori committed for a mandatory psych evaluation at a mental health facility. But a few hours later, she's discharged. It was only a few months after that, in July 2019, when Alex shot Charles dead in self-defense. No charges were filed. What is the emergency? I shot my brother-in-law. And was he armed also? Or just, yeah. He came at me with a bat. Anyone been drinking or doing drugs or anything today or no? I don't know. But I've never seen him that enraged before. Okay. What part of his body is injured? In the chest. Okay. Is he awake and responsive or unconscious? Unconscious. In September 2019, when it had only been a month or so since Charles's death, Lori moved with Tylee and JJ to Rexburg, Idaho, where Chad and his wife Tammy lived. The detectives found photos which showed that Lori, Alex, JJ, and Tylee visited Yellowstone National Park on September 8, 2019. That was the last time anyone had seen Tylee before she went missing. When the police checked the family cell phone records from that time, it showed that Alex had been at Chad's property for about 2 hours on the morning of September 9, 2019. According to the prosecution, Alex Cox's cell phone data placed him here for 2 hours the day after Tylee Ryan was last seen. Kennedy Elementary School in Rexburg, Idaho assured the detectives that JJ had attended his classes on September 22, 2019. Melanie, Lori's friend, was staying over with Lori and JJ that night, and confirmed that she had seen JJ being carried into the apartment by Alex that night. However, she couldn't find him the next day and asked Lori about it. Lori responded that JJ was turning into a zombie and had to be taken away. A doorbell video captured JJ playing with a friend on the morning of September 23, 2019. This clip became the last known footage of him. They played every day almost until he said he was moving to his grandmother's. When the police checked Lori and Alex's cell phone records, they found that Alex had visited Chad's house for a few hours again on September 23, 2019. And on September 24, 2019, Lori had made a call to JJ's school to inform them that she was withdrawing JJ from the school and would now be homeschooling him. On the night of October 9, 2019, someone tried to shoot Tammy, Chad's wife, with a paintball gun while she was in the driveway of her home. She called 911 informing the respondents about the incident, but the perpetrator was never found. Fremont County Sheriff. Hi, I need to report something. Okay, go ahead. What's the address? Okay, at 202 North, 1900 East. The corner with the blinking yellow light on Salem Highway. Is it a suspicious person? Yes. Okay. What was he wearing? He was all dressed in black, and he had a mask on. And he's at the blinking light now. Is where you saw him? No. I'm when he's on now because I pulled up into our driveway, and I didn't step out of the back seat of my car. And suddenly he was there and he had a paintball gun. And he was okay. And like he was gonna shoot at me. And I kept asking him what he was doing so I could tell it was a paintball thing. And then he just kept doing it, so I yelled for my husband and then he took off running around the back of my house. Just 10 days after that, on October 19, 2019, 49-year-old Tammy was mysteriously found dead in her home. I was asleep and I heard a thump and heard my dad yell, Garth, come quick. I just ran over and picked her up and put her back on the bed. Said to my dad, I said, I think she's dead. Chad claimed that Tammy had gone to bed early the previous night as she wasn't feeling well. Her body was never autopsied as Chad refused to allow it. The detectives had a lot on their hands. They needed to take another look at the deaths of all the people related to Chad and Lori to see if there is any foul play. The law enforcement agencies intensified their investigation into the disappearances of the children. Deaths of Tammy, Charles and Joseph, as well as Chad and Lori's escape from Rexburg. In December 2019, Tammy's body was exhumed so an autopsy could be performed. The results deemed her death suspicious. The Utah State Medical Examiner immediately saw bruising on her body and he determined that Tammy died of asphyxiation, meaning she was held down and suffocated. It was determined that Tammy had been asphyxiated by someone else. However, the death of Joseph Ryan, Lori's third husband and Tylee's biological father, didn't seem to be suspicious. A reopened investigation concluded that Joseph died of natural causes. While looking into the death of Lori's fourth husband Charles, detectives found police interviews that showed Lori smiling as she recalled the face-off between her brother Alex and Charles. How long have you lived here? Like 3 weeks. Oh geez. Yeah. Okay. That's why the neighbors don't ask. Gotcha. Like, hi neighbor. Sorry. What was striking about the footage that we saw was that there's no remorse. There's no, oh my gosh, my husband's dead. The detectives also learned that Alex did not perform CPR and waited 43 minutes after shooting Charles to call the police. Do you have some ID on you, sir? Yeah. Alex Cox is supposedly performing CPR on a guy that has 2 bullet holes in his chest, and that is going to be an incredibly messy and bloody business. But when the police get there, when you look at the footage, he doesn't appear to have any blood on his body at all. Another investigation revealed that in February 2007, Alex had attacked Joseph as well, claiming he'd been abusive to Lori and the children. For this incident, however, Alex was sentenced to jail for some time. In the midst of all this, when the detectives thought of locating and questioning Alex about Charles's death, something unexpected happened. 51-year-old Alex died on December 12, 2019. Just 2 weeks after getting married, Alex Cox collapses in the upstairs bathroom of his new bride's home. Zulema's 25-year-old son, Joseph, calls 911. What is the emergency? I have an older male here named Alex. He just passed out here on my bathroom. He's not breathing. Although his death was attributed to blood clots and high blood pressure, the drug Narcan was also found in his system. But ultimately, the medical examiner would rule that Alex's death was due to natural causes. 2 months after the kids were reported missing, the detectives found Lori and Chad on January 25, 2020 in Hawaii. On January 25, Chad and Lori are located in Hawaii by police, and Lori has served with a court order telling her she's got to produce JJ and Tylee within 5 days. Lori was immediately served with a court order demanding her to physically show up at a Madison County court in Idaho with both her children by January 30, 2020. When that day came, Lori failed to produce her children or disclose their whereabouts to the authorities, which violated the court order. On February 20, 2020, the detectives arrested Lori in Hawaii on charges of child abandonment. Breaking news overnight in the case of those missing Idaho children. Their fugitive mother has now been arrested in Hawaii, held on a $5 million bond. Police say they have arrested Lori Vallow on an Idaho warrant weeks after she failed to comply with that court order to produce her 2 children to the authorities. Lori provided inconsistent and false information to authorities about their whereabouts and never gave them a clear answer. Welcome back, Lori. Where are your kids? Anything you want to say, Lori? Lori, did you do something to your children? Where are your children? I see the SUV with Lori coming toward me, and it just stops right in front of me. Lori, where are your kids? How come you're not telling anybody where your kids are? And she looked over at me, and then she just slowly looked away and covered her face. She was additionally charged with resisting officers, criminal solicitation to commit a crime, and contempt of court. Her bail was initially set at $5 million, but was later lowered to $1 million after being extradited back to Idaho. Lori tried to reach out to many local bond companies for help, but none of them were willing to work with her. Following her arrest, Chad was confronted by many journalists and asked if the children were safe. He refused to answer any questions. Is there anything that you would like to say to people at all who are, number 1, concerned about the kids or concerned about you and your wife? Anything at all you want to say to them? We're just grateful for any support. We just have to wait for the legal process to order through. And then can you tell me, Mr. Fayetteville, are the kids okay? I'll come in. Okay. Keeping in mind that their children had been missing for months now, Lori and Chance behavior raised questions about their roles in the tragic event and made the detectives fear the worst. The detectives carried out another search on Chance property in Rexburg on June 9, 2020 with the hopes of finding any clues that could lead to JJ and Tylee. But what they found on the property left them completely shocked. We start to learn that they are digging in the backyard by this fire pit. They had reason to believe that one or both of the kids were buried in the backyard. According to the prosecution, Alex Cox's cell phone data placed him here for 2 hours the day after Tylee Ryan was last seen. Authorities later discovered her remains in the same spot. While searching through the pet cemetery built in the back of Chad's property, the detective discovered human remains buried in shallow graves. Right now, we are following breaking news in Idaho where Rexburg police say human remains have been discovered on Vallow-Daybell's property. JJ's body was found in a black plastic bag near a tree. His mouth and ankles have been bound with duct tape. Once I removed some soil, there was a black plastic bag with a round object protruding through the dirt. It was what appeared to be a small body tightly wrapped in black plastic, covered in duct tape. A piece of wood paneling and 3 large white flat rows have been laid in a row over his remains. Several layers of duct tape from his chin to his forehead area. His arms were duct taped with several layers of duct tape. His feet were also duct taped and bound. Tylee's remains were found a short distance away buried in the pet cemetery. Investigators cleared the dirt around her remains for hours before knowing for sure that they'd found her until a piece of bone finally confirmed what they'd suspected. Her body had been dismembered and seemed to have been burned in a fire pit. There was a partial human skull underneath the melted bucket. Chad was arrested and ordered held at a $1 million bond. The Idaho man at the center of a missing children's case is in custody. Vallow-Daybell was arrested this morning by police for questioning after a search warrant of his home came up with human remains. On June 10, 2020, the Woodcock and Ryan families confirmed that the human remains found on Chad's property were those of JJ and Kylie. The nationwide search for 2 missing children has come to a gruesome end. Family members confirmed that the remains found on Chad Daybell's rural property in Idaho are the bodies of his stepchildren. The finding was officially confirmed by Rexburg Police Department on June 13, 2020. Tylee and JJ's bodies were sent to Dr. Garth Warren for an autopsy, and the results were disheartening. I determined the cause of death to be asphyxia by plastic bag over the head and duct tape covering the mouth. And then there's another segment that's other significant conditions. I put bound with duct tape, bruising of the arms, and abrasion to the neck. Evidence suggested that JJ was likely alive when he was buried. Dr. Warren did not find any trauma to the internal organs or any evidence of overt natural disease to any of JJ's organs. I did not see any trauma to the internal organs, and I did not see any evidence of overt natural disease to any of the organs. However, JJ did have bruising on his arms and neck and a hemorrhage under the nail of his right thumb. There are additional injuries including bruising of both upper arms, symmetrical bruising on the right upper arm and left upper arm. And there's also a diffuse hemorrhage on the underline the right thumbnail. Dr. Warren received Tylee's burned remains in 3 separate bags. He said that Tylee's organs had severe decomposition and had been charred and shrunken. He claimed that the 16-year-old girl died of homicide by unspecified means. Tylee was definitely killed, but Dr. Warren wasn't able to pinpoint how it was done. I determined the cause of death to be homicide by unspecified means. So homicide by unspecified means is a term that is or can be used for the cause of death, when the forensic pathologist has essentially looked at the totality of the case, including the circumstances of the death, the autopsy findings and lack thereof autopsy findings in this case, the toxicology, and also, based on medical and social records that the forensic pathologist, which me in this case, feels that the cause of death was by homicide, but I just can't pinpoint exactly what that was. Most homicides, you can say something like gunshot wound to the head when the body's intact or a stab wound to the heart. I can't do that in this case. Later, authorities found a storage locker in Rexburg and learned that it had been rented by Lori in October 2019. A video camera captured Lori and her brother, Alex, moving JJ and Kylie's belongings to and from the locker. East Idaho News obtained surveillance footage from a storage facility in Idaho. It shows Lori and a man who looks a lot like Alex making multiple trips to the storage locker in the weeks after JJ and Tylee disappeared. Inside the locker, the police discovered items including clothing, bikes, and photographs belonging to Tylee and JJ. And they find a scooter, they find a backpack with JJ's initials, and they find a photo album with photos of JJ and Tylee. These items had been left behind when Tylee abruptly left Rexburg in late November 2019. Jan, Lori, can you tell me where your kids are? Would you tell me what happened to JJ? You know, the grandparents are very worried, Lori. Tell us where your kids are. Everybody wants to know. Lori and Chad were soon charged with destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. But it wasn't until May 25, 2021 when Lori and Chad were both indicted over the murders of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, Chad's first wife in Idaho. They were each charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy and grand theft in connection with the deaths of JJ and Tylee, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in the death of Tammy. And Lori Vallow is now officially booked into the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. She's now known as inmate number 153745. For me, it simply proves the fact that she's been plaguing the system so long in our life, and this was just a continuation of that. And she's finally played it out. That's my personal feelings. I am elated. I'm relieved. I have waited for this day for 270 days. Yeah. Just like with everything else in this craziness, it took 9 months for once we realized JJ was missing, it took 9 months for them to find their bodies. And then now it's 9 months that this has been put off because of her competency issues. So, here's another 9 months, and then what is it? April, May, June, July, August. So another 9 months and we'll get to trial. So 9 months. Yeah. On October 11th, 2022, after a year of mental health counseling, Lori was finally deemed competent to stand trial. New developments today in the case of the Rexburg woman accused in the deaths of 2 of her children and her current husband's late wife. For a second time, Lori Vallow has been found competent to stand trial. On October 19, 2022, she made her first appearance in court after a long time for her arraignment on charges over the murders of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy. She refused to enter a plea, prompting the judge to enter a not guilty plea on her behalf. Vallow and her husband, Daugherty, have pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder and conspiracy charges related to the deaths of Joshua J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell. On March 2, 2023, an Idaho judge ruled that for the murders of J.J., Tylee, and Tammy, there would be separate trials held for Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. The trial date for Chad's case was yet to be scheduled while Lori's was set to begin on April 3, 2023. Prosecutors in Idaho had found to seek the death penalty against Lori and Chad for the murders of J.J., Tylee, and Tammy. Prosecutors alleged that Lori and Chad conspired with Lori's brother Alex to murder Tammy, J.J., and Tylee, not only as a part of their doomsday cult beliefs, but also for financial purposes so that they could collect Tammy's life insurance money and the children's Social Security and survivor benefits. Lori's defense team argued that the death penalty be scrapped as a lot of evidence had recently been handed over to them, and they wouldn't have enough time to fully review it. On March 21, 2023, the judge ruled that Lori Vallow will not face the death penalty for allegedly killing her 2 children and conspiring with Chad Daybell in the murder of his ex-wife Tammy. However, the possibility of Chad facing the death penalty was still on the table. As planned, Lori Vallow's trial for allegedly killing her 2 children and conspiring to kill Tammy Daybell began in Idaho on April 3, 2023. On April 13, Lori's former friend Melanie Gibb testified during the trial that Lori had told her that both her children had dark spirits. Melanie further testified that in early September 2019, when she'd gone to visit Lori in Rexburg, she found that under the influence of Chad, Lori had become convinced that her children had signed contracts with Satan and their spirits had turned dark. Another friend of Lori testified that Lori once said to her, Tylee and JJ had become zombies, and that she was on a mission to rid the world of zombies. This incident took place months before the children's remains were found. On April 25, Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett, testified against her. She took the stand and claimed that she played an active role in the lives of her niece and nephew, JJ and Tylee. On top of that, when she heard that the children had gone missing, she was unable to contact Lori for months. A dramatic phone call between Summer and Lori was played for the jury. The call took place shortly after JJ and Tylee's bodies were discovered buried in Chad's backyard in Idaho and while Lori was in jail. Lori, if you let that happen to them and didn't tell us it was to be in the ground like a piece of trash, then I don't know you because you would have never done anything like that. That's correct. And if you knew, I didn't tell us, that's all. Thank you. We loved him. We would have taken them. We would have taken care of them. You could have gone off and done anything you wanted. That's what she thinks? You don't think I'm in pain? No, I don't. I think you were dancing on the beach having a great time, getting married. And you took pictures to prove your kids don't deserve a burial, but you need to get wedding pictures? You don't think that's upsetting? A call between Lori and her oldest son Colby was also looked at. I would have never thought you would have ever done something like this. What is it that you think that I've done? Are you sorry for me, or are you sorry for my siblings? I'm sorry that you don't really fully understand the situation. On the stand, Colby said that his mother Lori had spent her whole life protecting and looking after her children. But all that changed after she met Chad Daybell. During one hearing session of her trial, Lori spoke for the first time and stated that Tylee and JJ had visited her from heaven. One of the times that Tylee came to me as a spirit after she died, she said she commanded me and she said to me, "Stop worrying, Mom. We are fine." She knows how I worry and how I miss her. First time JJ visited me after he passed away, he put his arm around me and he said to me, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. I love you. And I know you loved me every minute of my life." Later, she called Tammy her friend and went on to describe one of the times when Tammy had visited her. "My eternal friend, Tammy Daybell, has visited me on several occasions. She came to bring me peace and comfort, and I know that she is extremely busy helping her family, especially her children and grandchildren, and I have a great love for Tammy." On May 12, 2023, after 6 weeks of dramatic testimony, the jury announced that it had reached a verdict after just 7 hours of deliberation. and to profit financially. You justified all of this by going down a bizarre religious rabbit hole, and clearly you are still down there. While you were enjoying your new life in Hawaii, countless law enforcement officers, family members, and volunteers were searching for your children. And I don't think to this day you have any remorse for the effort and heartache you caused for others who looked for your children when you knew where they were and knew they were dead. They were found dead, burned, mutilated, and dismembered, and buried like animals. After you knew they were dead, you collected public-funded assistance payments meant for them, and that was blood money you kept for yourself. And that's the grand theft charge you've been convicted of. Your sister, your son talked to you, begged with you while you were in the jail during phone calls I heard at trial, and those were very sad and difficult calls to hear. And you didn't provide any assistance or comfort to them. Lori Vallow was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and grand theft over the deaths of her children, Tylee and JJ, in Ada County Court in Boise, Idaho. She was also found guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in the death of Chad Daybell's first wife, Tammy. Those crimes all need to be taken into account separately and distinctly and individually, and you need to be held accountable separately for each of the 3 murders. So on those counts, the court will run consecutively the count 2 murder of Tylee Ryan, consecutive to count for the murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow, and count 5 will run consecutive to count 2 and 4, the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tamara Tammy Daybell. So 3 consecutive life terms of prison. The remaining counts will be concurrent to the counts that are consecutive. Court will impose fines as requested by the state in the amount of $25,000 for all counts except the grand theft. On the grand theft, the fine will be in the amount of $1,000. On Monday, July 31, 2023, Lori was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in the murders of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old JJ. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn to try the above entitled action for our verdict. Unanimously answer the questions submitted to us as follows. Question number 1. In regards to count 1 of the amended indictment, is Lori Noreen Bowell thought guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Kylie Ryan and grand theft by deception? Answer: guilty. Is Lori Noreen Vallow not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Kylie Ryan? Answer: guilty. Is Lori Maureen Vallow not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow and grand theft by deception? Answer: guilty. Account 4, guilty. Account 5, guilty. Count 7, guilty. There it is. After 6 weeks of trial, including jury selection, Lori Vallow-Daybell found guilty on absolutely every charge: murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and grand theft in the deaths of 2 of her children and also Tammy Daybell, her ex-husband's late wife. Chad Daybell still faces first-degree murder and conspiracy charges in Idaho related to the deaths of Tammy Daybell and Lori's children. But he's waived his right to a speedy trial and is scheduled to be tried on April 1, 2024. Tylee and JJ's case shocked the nation due to the disturbing details of the children's deaths and the involvement of their own mother. The case highlights the importance of thorough investigations and accountability in cases involving missing children. One of Tylee's close friends stated that Tylee did not want to move to Idaho initially, but she went forward with the move because she wanted the best for her little brother JJ. She wanted to protect him. Her best friend also said that she received a few short and sweet text messages from Tylee in October 2019, but she now has realized that the person who was texting her back was not Tylee at all. Tylee's half-brother Colby and JJ's grandparents were deeply saddened by their loss. Although nothing could bring their loved ones back, they felt a little relieved that Lori was justly charged. Even though Lori and Chad had been charged with the murders, the whole truth behind what actually happened with Tylee and JJ was gone with them. Do you think that Lori was influenced by Chad, or was this something she'd always been harboring in her mind? What do you think of Lori and Chad's sentences? Were they justified, or should they have been given the death sentence?